Hello, it is Rachel, and welcome to your long game plan for losing your cool less and staying more calm as a parent. I can tell you, as someone who is not a calm person by nature, that I'm going to be sharing a lot of tools with you that I use myself to stay more calm and feel more in control as a parent. So, I want to jump into telling you all the strategies you need to lose your cool less, but first, I'm going to back up and give you a little bit of background and talk to you about what you need to know if you actually want to lose your cool less and stay more calm as a parent. And I wanted to start by telling you that the traditional strategies we tend to use to stay calm as parents are what I call band-aid parenting strategies. Now, what I mean by band-aid parenting strategies is that these are strategies that are sort of like a band-aid to the problem. They don't actually fix the problem. They're just a band-aid we put on, and they maybe give you some temporary relief, but they don't actually work in the long run. So things like taking deep breaths to stay calm. Maybe they work once or twice, but in the long run, that's not actually helping you keep your cool more and more. Or waking up each day and seeing it as a new opportunity. Things like promising yourself you'll do better. That doesn't actually last in the long run. You may do this over and over, promising yourself you will stay calm, and then you don't. You may even try unsuccessfully setting boundaries with your kids. You may say, well, if I get them to behave better, I'll feel better. I'll be able to stay more calm. But that doesn't necessarily work. And then when they don't listen to you, then you keep losing your cool. You may berate yourself or feel guilty and say things like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I be the adult? Why can't I stay more calm? What kind of damage am I doing to my children? Or you may also wonder why others can't stay calm and others stay calm and you can't. Now, I want to tell you that these strategies don't last because what they do is they focus on either you trying harder or you making yourself feel bad. And that's generally what we do when we're trying to stay calmer, is that we just say, okay, I'm going to try harder, I'm going to keep doing better, or we say, oh, I'm awful for not doing better. But none of these strategies address the reason you lose your cool in the first place. And I'm not just talking about what's happening around you. I'm not just talking about, well, your kids were misbehaving and it's not addressing your kids' misbehavior. I'm actually talking about what's going on for you that makes it hard for you to stay calm. Because I'm not in this, especially in this lesson, but in general, when I talk to parents about staying calm, I don't tell you that if you get everything around you to go the way you want it to, that's what's going to get you to stay calm. I want you to learn how to stay calm and keep your cool even when things around you aren't going well. That's ultimately the goal. You don't want to say, well, I am calm when my kids are doing what I want. That just gives them too much power. And it also means that you're going to be on a roller coaster based on what's going on around you. And that's not really healthy for you. So we're actually going to talk about the reasons you lose your cool in the first place. And that will help you stay calm even when things aren't going the way you want them to. So there's something very generally you need to know if you want to lose your cool less. Basically, not being able to stay calm is simply a sign that your yuck is bigger than your coping skills. And all that means is that you have more discomfort or something going on for you inside. You have more of that than an ability to cope with that. So ultimately, what we want to do if you want to stay more calm is we need to reduce your yuck. And I'm going to talk in a moment all about what yuck is. We're going to reduce your yuck and we're going to increase your coping skills. Because when we reduce your yuck, and again, this is something going on inside of you. It's not reducing your yuck by making everything around you going on, everything around you perfect or wonderful. It's actually how you can reduce the amount of discomfort you feel. And we're also going to talk about increasing your coping skills so that even when things aren't going well around you, even when you do have a lot of yuck, which ultimately happens in life, you know how to cope with it. Now, I will tell you that in that dealing with the stuff going on around you or increasing your coping skills, reducing your yuck is much easier to do proactively than in the moment. And I'm actually going to explain the science behind that because you need to know why it's actually much more effective to use some proactive strategies than to try to find the best strategy to help you calm down in the moment. So let's talk about that concept of yuck because that was a big part of what I said really leads to you not being able to stay calm or leads to you losing your cool. So I want to talk about, first of all, the concept of yuck, and then I'm going to get into the brain on yuck. But the concept of the yuck factor is very simple, that when human beings are in a good place, We act positively when we're well rested, when maybe you've had a good conversation with a spouse or a friend, you're in a good place. You can stay calm. You can be patient. You can be the parent that you imagine in your mind. However, when you are in a place of yuck, and yuck is a blanket term I use to describe anything uncomfortable. So yuck could be that you're tired or hungry or feeling overwhelmed or stressed or annoyed at your kids or feeling helpless or anxious. Anything uncomfortable I call yuck. And what happens is when we are in yuck, we do not act positively. We do not act consistently with our values. So we're not calm. We're not patient. And that's because of what's happening when in the brain when we are in yuck. So I will tell you that there is a part of the brain that allows us to be positive and mature and act consistently with our values and be this calm parent that we want to be. That part of the brain is called the prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain is really the part that helps us, do the things that we want to do because it helps us control our impulses. It helps us regulate our emotions. So even though we're really frustrated with our kids, this part of the brain will help us say, well, you know what? We're frustrated, but they're kids. It's not that big of a deal. This part of the brain allows us to have empathy and really recognize what our values are. So maybe you want to be a calm parent. This part of the brain will help you align your behavior with those values. And this part of the brain will also help you solve problems so that you know how to deal with them so you don't lose your cool. But here's what happens. Whenever we are in some sort of yuck, and again, it could be that we're hungry or tired or disappointed or annoyed, anything uncomfortable, our brain senses yuck as a threat. And because it senses it as a threat, it turns on an alarm. And that alarm is our fight or flight response. And the qualities of our behavior when we are in fight or flight are almost the exact opposite of when we are able to access our prefrontal cortex. And I say that we're able to access our prefrontal cortex because our fight or flight response actually shuts down any part of the brain that it feels is unnecessary for survival. So it actually shuts down that prefrontal cortex or that mature, responsible, values-based part of the brain. So when we're in fight or flight, we can't regulate our emotions. We can't calm ourselves down as effectively. We are irrational. So we may think, oh my gosh, if my kids aren't listening to me, then they're never going to listen to me. They're never going to listen to an authority figure. They're never going to get into a good college. They're going to be they're going to be in our basement playing video games when they're 30 years old. We take these huge steps, these leaps that are not necessarily rational because we can't see the big picture when we are in yuck. We can't realize that this may be an isolated incident or that even if it's not an isolated incident, we can handle it. What happens when we're in yuck or we're in our fight or flight response is that we only see the confirming data that everything is horrible. So if you've asked your kids to put away their shoes and you've asked them 5 times and you're getting really frustrated and maybe someone comes in and says to you, hey, calm down, it's going to be okay. In that moment, you only see all of the information that it's not okay that your kids didn't put their shoes on. And again, it's not necessarily rational. The fight or flight response is meant to quote unquote protect us. And so it's not meant to be rational or see the big picture. It's really focused on in the moment. And it's not really necessarily always accurate, but you know what it feels like to be in your fight or flight response. And like I said, our behavior when we are in fight or flight doesn't tend to serve us well. Let's talk about our behavior when we're in yuck. And this is really what's going on when you lose your cool. So human beings, unless we have a really great coping skill, which is why we're going to talk about your coping skills. If you have good coping skills, this doesn't happen. But if you don't, this is the behavior you're going to see when either you're in yuck or when your child is in yuck. So the first thing that we can do when we are in yuck, and this is incredibly common for both children and adults, is that we take our yuck and we turn it out on other people. So yuck turned out could be aggression. So maybe when you're in yuck, you yell at your children. Maybe when you're in yuck, you're disrespectful. You may say things like, how dare you do that? I can't believe you. You're so stupid. I've told you this before. You're disrespectful. Maybe your yuck turned out could be an adult type of meltdown. You know kids have meltdowns when they aren't getting their way. That is their yuck turned out. But we also have meltdowns too, if we're being honest. Yuck turned out is also blame. So maybe you're not necessarily blaming your child. Maybe you're blaming your spouse. Maybe your child didn't do something and you turn all of that yuck onto your spouse. It's very, very common. Now, the second thing that we tend to do when we're in yuck, and very honestly, humans can do all 3 of these things. So, we're very lucky. We can deal with our yuck in very many unhealthy ways. The second way we may deal with yuck is to turn it in. Yuck turned in is the negative self-talk, and we certainly do that probably pretty often. It's the things like, I'm an awful parent and I'm never going to get this right and I'm messing up my kids. This may also look like low self-esteem where you simply don't believe in yourself, or low motivation. You've just thought, I can't even get this right. I'm not even going to try anymore. Eventually, it could lead to anxiety as well, where you have all these feelings, you don't know how to handle them, and you can start to become very anxious. Now, the last behavior doesn't usually start until about 7 or 8 years old. So if you have a young child, you may not see this in them, but we certainly see this in adults all the time. And this is where we numb our yuck. And basically, I would say we are a culture of yuck numbers. What happens is we have so much yuck and we're not necessarily dealing with it in a healthy way. So we turn to something else to help us numb. So we may turn to electronics. You know, if you're at the end of the day scrolling on your phone through social media, or even in the middle of the day, you just need to tune out scrolling on that social media. And kids obviously do this a lot too. It could be sugar. That's my particular yuck number that I use. A lot of adults use alcohol though, or drugs, or other, kind of high risk behavior. The high risk behavior tends to happen a lot in teenagers, I will say. What happens as adults is, again, we drink or we tune out through sports or watching the news. Or I will also say that busyness, being really busy, is also an example of numbing yuck. A lot of us just make our lives so busy that we never have to think about our yuck. So what I want you to take away from this is not only do you need to know that when we're in yuck, we behave negatively, but more importantly, the opposite is true. When you are behaving negatively as an adult, or doing something you don't want, losing your cool, being disrespectful to your kids, it is a sign that you are in yuck. And I want you to know that, because instead of beating yourself up for this or saying, I'm just gonna do better the next time, what you're gonna start to do is understand your yuck. And that's when you're gonna start to get in control of the situation. So I wanna talk about something that I call the yuck curve, because this is what's gonna help you understand what's actually happening in the moment and why it's so hard in the moment to actually calm yourself down. So this curve shows what basically happens with yuck over time. So let's say you're frustrated with your kids because you asked them to put away their dishes and they didn't. And you asked them again and they still didn't. And so you're getting more and more frustrated. What happens with your yuck is that it gets bigger and bigger. Eventually it reaches a peak though, and it does come down. So you can see that represented by this curve. It gets bigger and bigger, and then eventually it comes down. Now, while you are on this yuck curve, that's when we're seeing yuck behavior. Now, this could be healthy yuck behavior where you're coping in a healthy way, or what most of us do is the unhealthy yuck behavior, which is where we're aggressive or disrespectful, or where we're maybe holding it in and just being mean to ourselves instead of our kids. But that when someone is on this curve, whether it's you or your child, you are usually going to see very unhealthy yuck behavior. That's simply a symptom that either you or your child are in yuck. And what you need to know is that when someone is on the yuck curve, you are not going to see positive, mature, values-based behavior. Because when someone is in yuck, remember, they can't access that prefrontal cortex. So positive, mature, values-based behavior, which is basically keeping your cool, right, happens before the curve of yuck, before you travel that curve, and after you get through that entire curve. So once you calm down, you know this. You then can see the big picture. You can realize that it's not the end of the world. But when you're in it, you can't do that. And so you really have to understand this not only about your kids, but about yourself. When you're in yuck, it's very hard to get out of it. And I will tell you that a lot of people will say, well, how do we get out of this yuck curve more quickly? I will tell you that, but let me start by letting you know what actually keeps us stuck in the yuck curve, because this is going to start to lead to the solutions that I teach you. What actually keeps us stuck in yuck is our interpretation of a situation as a threat. So if you see your kids not putting their shoes on and you say, oh my gosh, they're not putting their shoes on, that means they're not listening to me, they're disrespecting me, your brain is going to interpret that as a threat. And remember what happens when your brain sees a threat is that it goes into fight or flight, and that's when you get the negative behavior. So we're going to talk about how you interpret situations, because as soon as you see it as a threat, your brain is going to go into yuck, and you're not going to be able to stay calm. You're going to lose your cool. Ultimately, what brings us out of yuck is a combination of your brain realizing, oh, you know what? It actually isn't the end of the world if my kids don't listen to me, where you realize it's okay, I can handle this. Yeah, I don't like this behavior and it needs to change, but I can handle it. We're going to be okay. That safety that your brain senses, plus it does take a little bit of time because the fight or flight response is actually a physiological response that takes place in your body, and it takes a little time for that to shut down. But when you realize you are safe and you take a little time, then you will get off of this yuck curve, and then you can handle the situation much better. But when you're losing your cool, you're basically on the yuck curve. All right, so I want to talk lastly in this section about the true cause of your yuck. Now, of course, you could list, and I'm actually going to have you do this as an exercise. You could list all of the things that cause you yuck. Your kids not listening, having too much on your to-do list, your spouse not doing what you asked them to do, just having all these different demands in your life. All of those scenarios cause you yuck, but I want to explain why from a clinical perspective why these cause yuck in particular. So I will tell you that when you're losing your cool and you're in yuck, it is a sign that your brain has noticed that your needs are not met. So let me start with biological needs, because this is going to make a lot of sense to you. When you don't have nutritious food, or when you don't have enough sleep, or when you don't have enough energy, you are going to be in yuck, and you're not going to be, you're not going to be the calm, patient person you want to be, because your biological needs are not fully met. And what the human brain does is it focuses first on making sure needs are met. And then we can go, if anyone has ever seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which most of you have, you know that our brain will sense our basic needs first, and then we can be calm, and then we can start to act consistently with our values. Now, I will tell you one last biological need I want you to think about, besides you need to be eating nutritious food and getting sleep and having enough energy, is that when your temperament doesn't match your environment, that will also put you into yuck. And this is more about your biology, because your temperament is a biological quality. So let's say you're an introvert and you have a child who's very loud and they talk a lot. That is going to be an example of where, if this happens over and over and over in a day, eventually you're going to go into yuck, because your brain is saying, hey, I need some quiet time and I'm not getting it. And so you're going to go into yuck. So it makes sense that when our biological needs are not met, we're going to go into yuck. But what you also need to know is that we have emotional needs. And when our emotional needs are not met, our brain actually doesn't differentiate biological needs from emotional needs. Our brain will sense a threat when our emotional needs are not met as well. So there are 5 emotional needs. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because we're going to talk about them again, and I'm going to show you what this looks like. But the 5 emotional needs are, first of all, connection. We have a need to feel a sense of belonging, to feel like we have intimate relationships. That is a need. None of these are luxuries. We think these are luxuries. They're not. Our brain will actually put us into yuck if these are not met. So if you feel disconnected, you will go into yuck. The way I actually describe these is like they're like a bank account, and with every emotional need, you can have, just like with a bank account, there are withdrawals and deposits. The same is true of these emotional needs. So if you have more withdrawals than deposits into these emotional needs accounts, that's what's going to put you into yuck. So again, connection is the first. The next emotional need that we all have is the need to know we matter. And I know it seems like, oh, it would be nice to know I matter, but our brain actually senses it as a threat when we feel like we don't matter. So if someone is talking to you and they are treating you like you don't matter, like you're asking your kids to do something and they're not listening, that is going to be a huge withdrawal. And if you don't have enough deposits, then you are going to go into yuck. So knowing you matters a lot to your brain. And if you have too many withdrawals and not enough deposits, you are going to be in yuck. The next emotional need is control. We need to know that we have a say in what happens to us. If you feel out of control, like you've asked your kids to do something and they're not listening, again, a huge withdrawal. And if you don't have enough deposits in your life, for example, if you feel out of control in other areas of your life, maybe it has nothing to do with your kids. Your brain doesn't actually say, oh, well, I feel in control in parenting, so I'm okay. No, your brain actually looks at all of the control in all areas of your life. So if you feel out of control with a job, or you're trying to get something done and you can't, then your kids not listening to you is going to be a huge withdrawal, and you are going to go into yuck. Another emotional need is capability. We all need to know we have the tools we need to get through. And if we feel like we don't know how to get our kids to do something, that's going to be a huge withdrawal. And lastly is the need to know that everything is going to be okay. And very honestly, with parenting, we don't know that everything is going to be okay. So a lot of us are constantly fearful or anxious because we have a lot of withdrawals because we don't know that our kids are going to be fine, that we're going to be fine. So that creates a lot of yuck in the form of anxiety. Now, let's just talk about how this actually plays out in real examples before I wrap up this section for you. And you're actually going to start to look at your yuck. Let me give you two examples. First of all, let's say a mom loses her cool when her son spills his milk. Now, if she's in a good place, she's going to say, oh my gosh, yeah, kids spill their milk, not a big deal. But if she's tired or hungry, that could put her into yuck because her biological needs are not met. If she's exhausted because she's been cleaning up spills all day long and she's been doing one thing after the other, her brain is going to sense a threat. Oh my gosh, one more thing I have to do. And then she's going to lose her cool because her son spilled his milk. Her son spilling his milk may also make her feel more out of control, or she might say, oh my gosh, I have so much more work to do now, or I don't know how to get him to stop. All of these thoughts and feelings are withdrawals from our emotional needs or our biological needs. And that's why something as quote unquote simple as someone spilling their milk can put us into yuck. If our biological needs and our emotional needs in our lives in general are not met, this could be that our kids are withdrawing or life is withdrawing, then we are going to go into yuck with something as simple as a son spilling milk. Or another example, a dad loses his cool when his daughter complains about homework. Now, if he's in a good place, he's going to say, well, sure, she's going to complain about homework. I didn't like homework when I was a kid. It's not, no one likes homework, and I get why she's going to complain. When he senses it that way, he's not going to go into yuck because his brain's not sensing a threat. However, if he is, again, tired or hungry, or maybe he had a really long day, or he feels like he's taught his daughter not to complain about homework over and over and over, and she still is complaining about homework, he may feel out of control. He may feel incapable. He may even worry about something like, well, is my daughter ever going to be able to do her homework? That could be a threat to his need for security. If he feels like she's never going to be able to do homework, she's not going to get good grades, she's not going to have a successful future, that would be a withdrawal from his need for security. So you can see how these scenarios can either be a threat or not, depending on our level of yuck. And that's why we have to, as parents, start with our level of yuck. Again, we're also going to learn coping skills. That's really important. But if we aren't reducing our level of yuck to begin with, then all the coping skills in the world won't help. If we keep having all of this yuck, we simply will never have enough coping skills to be able to handle it. So I want you to be aware of the true cause of your yuck, the clinical need, causes related to biological and emotional needs, because you're going to understand when I start to talk to you about the solution where it's coming from. So now I want you to go to activity 1A, which is at the under the video that you're watching right now. And I want you to think about your yuck and its effects on you, what goes on in your home. You're going to start to think about what is causing yuck and how do you behave in response to your yuck. And then you're going to come back for section 1B, where I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about how you can reduce your yuck by thinking about whether what's going on around you is a threat or not. So I look forward to seeing your results to activity 1A and then seeing you again in section 1B. Take care.